Owen-Jones, who is going to, well, he's admitted he doesn't quite know what he's going to say yet, and I've told him that's where the best talks come from. But it's basically about walking. It's about what Gatekeeper is all about. It's about pilgrimage and walking in the land. So Peter Owen-Jones, thank you.
Thank you so much for asking me here. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for all who put this event together. This is my lectern, so I'm not going to stand behind it right now. Just a little bit. I'm a parish priest within the Church of England. I look after and serve 3 small parishes on the Sussex Downs, just to the east of Lewes. A village called Firle, Glynde you might have heard of because that's where Glyndebourne is based, and a tiny little crossroads village called Beddingham. And I have driven up at great speed to be here with you now. Here are some words from The Spell of the Sensuous. It's a book by David Abraham. Caught up in a mass of abstractions, our attention hypnotized by a host of human-made technologies that only reflect us back to ourselves. It is all too easy for us to forget our carnal inherence in a more than human matrix of sensations and sensibilities. Our bodies have formed themselves in a delicate reciprocity with the manifold textures, sounds, and shapes of an animate earth. Our eyes have evolved in subtle interaction with other eyes, as our ears are attuned by their very structure to the howling of wolves and the honking of geese. To shut ourselves off from these other voices, to continue by our lifestyles, to condemn these other sensibilities to the oblivion of extinction, is to rob our own senses of their integrity and to rob our minds of their coherence. We are only human in contact and conviviality with what is not human. I'm not sure I completely agree with the last sentence, but we'll come on to that. Once, a while back, I was in love. Utter chaos. Complete chaos. I love the way religions talk about love as this force that binds, and this force that caresses, this force that soothes and nurtures. But most of it experienced deep love as profound chaos. And I uttered these words to her. Breath of my breath, soul of my soul, skin of my skin. They came from a place deep within me. They emerged, and she did not understand them. I did not understand them. They were born, and now they exist in the world with a billion other words being spoken right now. So perhaps now is the time to explore them. This trinity of love. The trinity of God, love, and the land. Let's start with God. Soul of my soul. There are, of course, many different realities to choose from. And each one of us is capable of inhabiting simultaneously several different realities at once. I think this is called multitasking. I start with soul of my soul because I perceive it as the underlying reality, the all in all, the Om, the breath, the still small voice, the oneness that many of the great religious teachers and prophets have sensed and known. It is what Rumi, the romantic poets, the landscape poets, it's what they are feasting on. The unutterable sacred. When I was on the phone trying to find a sentence that describes the raison d'etre of why we are all here in this room this afternoon, what is the common denominator? I walk a great deal, living in the feline hills of the South Downs. And Louise mentioned a phrase that I loved, and when I heard it, and it is, walking in pilgrimage. What I love about the phrase is that it has no destination. It is open to encounter. It is prepared to leave the path. I watched some of the chancellors rejigging of the economy. Did anyone see that the other day? No, okay. And it left me feeling unseen and unknown. That I was living in the midst of a society whose purpose I find increasingly disturbing. And what disturbs me most, I think, about George Osborne's decisions is that the outcome demands from us all an increasing level of economic institutionalization. And that the volume of the rhetoric regarding economic dependence in relation to well-being, in relation to the well-being of the body and the soul, is becoming louder and louder. And that the frame nailed around human identity and how a human life is lived is becoming higher and smaller as we are placed ever increasingly into a box. The only escape is encounter with the other. And this encounter has fermented a love affair with the unknown and what is made known, what is given along that path. We are on a pilgrimage, all of us, each one of us, into the unknown. I was in Edinburgh yesterday morning. I woke up at 5 in a hotel room. I find it increasingly difficult to sleep with the electrical residue left in the room by Wi-Fi and televisions and kettles. There were 8 electric lights in my small room. 8 lights. And I lay in bed and I watched the day arrive. And over the stone grey roofs, a soft line of pink cloud emerged. It was moving as one. And as a child, I had swallowed the mantra of red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. We've all ingested it, haven't we? All of us. And I had always known it and seen every pink morning sunrise in such a manner. Normally, and it would have coloured my day, beginning as it did, as I was told, with a warning. But something changed. I accepted it without history, without preconditions, and saw it as it really was without the labels of agricultural folklore. And it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. So extravagant. So delicious to be roused, to be woken with this. With this. And since becoming a priest, I have become aware that the doctrinal narrative of God comes with some very real limits. And there are some big boundaries here. First of all, most religions are offered as history. As history. They claim the calendar. And secondly, they are offered as moral plumb lines measuring the depth of my own capacity for selfishness and greed, and the propensity to know my own story in the light of my own woundedness. The natural world expresses infinite variety, and tenderness, and brutality, and above all, sensuality. In a recent talk given by Dr. Owen Williams, the previous Archbishop of Canterbury in my home village, he said that he felt the Christian tradition had not come to terms with our physicality and the physicality of all being on this planet, that we had cast God into the ethereal realm, and the physical was left to languish in the land of suspicion and to a certain degree shame. And when I walk into the sensuous. The warm autumn winds, the scent of leaf litter of primroses, and colours within the mist, the rising of spring breaking through the soil, the dawn chorus, the sleep of snow, the throwing of crowns into ditches and thorns. It is a feast, a banquet. I am a bride every morning. The bride of the morning. Wash in the dew. If you want to stand next to angels. Eat from the tree. Let the pond still you. The storm rouse you, the rain speak. So what are we to do? What are we to do? Are we to carry on with, in the beginning God created night and day, leopards, beetles, and weak and feckless man? Is that where we are? Taste, touch, sight, sound. God created the sensual. Water running through the land, over the grass in the wintertime. Extraordinary. Shivering leaves, the evolution of petals, fur, the scent of rain, lips and feathers. And you and I. I heard consciousness described recently as the knowing of knowing. And it's pure. That description, I absolutely love it. But at a deeper level, it is surely the feeling, of the mystery of intuition, this soul of my soul. The skin of my skin. I spent a little time in southwest Crete recently. Have any of you been? Yes. Right down on the southwest tip in a little town called Paliokara. Wonderful, wonderful place. The great Cretan gorges nearby, Agirini, and Samaria, walls of rock and open roots. Then one day I walked to the back of the town. A boat had come in the night, carrying over 180 refugees who had just been picked up off the sea. This was earlier this year. And at the back of the town, which is really just a promontory overlooking the Med, there is an old raised field. Abandoned. Now it is abandoned. And beyond that, what's left of the fort that the Germans occupied during the Second World War. In the field there were these shoulder-high thistles, wonderful, up to about here, with great purple heads, and flying between them were swallowtail butterflies. I have since a boy been entranced by the swallowtail. There is a small population of swallowtail butterflies in this country living up on the edge of the fens. But I have never seen one. Not here, not in this land. And as a boy, I would collect butterflies. I would collect them and kill them with my mother's nail varnish remover and pin them onto boards and then mount them in cases. I did that. I have learned now that to do that is not decoration, it is an abomination. And now I am fiercely protective of all butterflies. I spent much of last year walking and writing a book about the walks. And there were many things that struck me. But what hit home the hardest is that the volume of the natural world seems to have been turned down. Here, as Peter was saying previously, here in these sacred isles, God's canary, the volume of the natural world seems to have been turned down. I am living with the volume turned down. We are living with the volume turned down. If you speak with elderly countrymen and women, they will describe hedgerows. In their childhood, they will describe hedgerows full of glowworms. On a hot June evening, can you imagine anything more romantic? They've gone, pretty much. Great clouds of lapwings. And they too have gone. And since the introduction of intensive agrochemical farming, the land has been leached of colour and sound. But there are still kingdoms and citadels. And up on a rough piece of abandoned land in Southwest Crete, there are still swallowtails drinking from thistles. What we have forgotten is that we are dealing continually with the force of one flower, one blade of grass that can break concrete. And fathered and mothered by the same force that gave birth to the stars, to light. The denuding of the land has not happened in the fields and rivers so much as it happens and is happening and has happened in the via media of our hearts. The sacred inheritance, the sacred language that speaks of a sacred relationship. And when this is removed from our culture, either by the poverty of a human-centered narrative or by a text-bound religion, part of our inheritance is missing. And that part is the loudest part. An American poet once wrote, he once cried, "What have we done to the earth? What have we done to our fair sister? Ravaged and plundered and ripped her and bit her, stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, tied her with fences and dragged her down." This is the mirror in which we know ourselves. We are living in the aftermath. Therefore, when you see the prayer of the common blue butterflies laying up in the brambles and opening their wings to take in the first rays of the morning sun, it is even more revealing, even more fluent, intense in its reality, because it is rarer now. Rarer now. And it can never disguise the shock of conception. And the same blend of ferocity and tenderness wrapped in the skin of my skin. And this is encountered in every leaf, in every wing and scale, petal and hill, this prayer. I will not be force-fed a partial reality, making do with the paucity of what I find. I will not give in to knowing existence in the manner of its undoing. I will mourn out loud. I will lament out loud. I will honor the albino blind skink. I will make my home with the frogs and deer. I will line my nest with moss and grass and wash in the pools that run down the slopes toward Talus Lynn. I will know the patterns drawn on the swallowtail's wing as my lover's skin as it shines and speaks beneath the trees. And the breath of my breath. A few years ago, I spent 26 days living in a cave in the Sinai Desert. You can't go there now. Well, you can go there now, but whether you will come back again. That's such a shame, isn't it? I mean, it's not just the news, I can feel it. Feel it. And caves surely do not belong to anyone, but it was lived in by an Egyptian Coptic monk, a desert father called Father Lazarus. He'd been an economics lecturer at Sydney University in Australia, and he had lost his mother, who he was very close to, and that had taken him into the place of crisis. And what he told me was that he woke up one morning knowing that he had to go to Egypt and that he had to spend the rest of his life as a Coptic monk. He was an atheist before that point, so that brought on a good deal of confusion. He sold his house, sold everything he had. He got a visa to Egypt, he got on a plane, flew to Cairo, and he took a bus to St. Anthony's Monastery, where he presented himself to the abbot and explained what had brought him to his door. And the abbot accepted him and said, if you're happy to wash dirty dishes for the first year, and then clean the latrines for the second year, and then cook for the third year, then I might consider letting you out into the desert from the fourth year. And he had been there for 12 years when I met him. But we live in a green land with streams and rivers, rain and seas. And the Sinai Desert is rock and sand. Rock and sand. Great piles of stones and boulders. It is a moonscape. And a land without the symphony of organic life. And the sunrise in the desert is brilliant. It is so, so pure. The land emerges from the black of night and begins to purple, begins to turn purple. It then turns blue. Everything turns blue. And what follows is a short period of green. The light is green. And the green then melts into red, then orange, then yellow. And finally, when the sun breaks over the crest of the land, everything turns silver and gold. And that takes about half an hour. And I used to get up, and I would be instructed to say prayers. But I had to see that every morning. And the simple premise of the Desert Fathers was that living in the absence of organic life, one had a clearer, more direct path to the divine. That there was not the distraction of peacock feathers, of fish nudging the surface of ponds, of the birds rousing the morning, and the complete decimation of the chaos of love. In the desert, when the land is heating and cooling, the cocks tick and speak. The rocks tick and speak. It is time that gets lost. And so the Desert Fathers have over time evolved a strict regime of prayer. And that is how I was taught to measure the day in the absence of clocks and time. That somehow it has come to be believed that God is better extracted there, in the desert. There, in the absence of the chaos of organic life. That my motives, my rewards and excuses are certainly, without doubt, laid bare. And once, one evening, a huge flock of house martins arrived, and the air was suddenly alive and moving, and they hid themselves in crevices and cracks and slept strangely. And I didn't see them leave in the morning. And in the evening, sometimes I could see vultures rising, taking the thermals way out in the distance. And I imagined that that would be the last thing I wanted to see before I died. And the cave was halfway up the side of a mountain, and a huge plain stretched out in front of me. It is from this tradition, mirroring the time Christ spent in the wilderness, that we have extracted our sense of the presence of the divine. It is this way of being with the divine that has filtered into the depths of the monotheistic faiths of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. These are all desert religions. And they are the result of what we have found and heard and seen in silence. And there was an all too brief flowering of the union of the divine and the temperate lands that we inhabit. A union of divine consciousness. And the makeup, the colour, scent and sound of this sacred land. There was a brief flowering. The Celtic Christians sought to translate the essential disciplines of desert spirituality and bring it to bear on the forests, lakes and woods of their own land, of this land. Cuthbert, Patrick. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the gentle night to you. But But with the arrival of St. Augustine, it was a much more human-centered view of the divine that emerged. And after the Civil War here in this country, a much more ruthless human-centered view took hold. But most of how we view the natural world in relation to the divine has its foundations way before we had any understanding of how a sperm fuses with an egg. Refraction of light. Before we knew about cells and molecules. Before we knew that the earth was not the center of the universe, it was merely an object of love. Before we knew that a tree is a combination of so many things: earth and light, chlorophyll and sugar, oxygen and carbon, greys and greens. Each tree supports a multitude of life, from bacteria to buzzards. The very idea that it is a singular life form is bound up with the lonely science of separateness. Living on the skin of the underside of our elbows are 5 or 6 different types of bacteria, and they are unique to that particular place on our bodies. And without them, the skin there would soon crack and weep. I cannot be alive without a host of other life forms living in symbiosis with me. They are me, and I am them. Dependence on the divine. Dependence on the divine. Give your life to Jesus. Kneel before Muhammad. Dependence on the divine as being the purest form of human life. This notion is incomplete. Look at the birds of the air. They neither reap nor sow, and yet my Father, my Mother in heaven takes care of them. And since the Enlightenment, we have made an incredible discovery. We've made so many extraordinary discoveries, but the greatest of all, I think, is that trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. And human beings, along with other mammals, inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. Beautiful. That life is lived mutually. Mutually. I exist, we exist in a fluid state, an active state, the living state of communion. Of communion. All things exist in communion. I can choose to behave as a separate entity, emotionally and spiritually disconnected from all that surrounds me. But in denying that connection, I deny the very reality of communion. And it is this denial that has placed us where we are now in relation to the natural world. If I am to walk in newness of life, then I have to know that each step, each breath is not possible for me in this state without the existence and life force of the other. That a separate and separated human existence is a psychosis, a state of mind from which I need to be healed. And the symptoms? The symptoms of this psychosis are the melting ice caps, of global warming, Each extinction is a symptom of this psychosis. Agrochemical farming is a symptom of this psychosis. Nuclear power. You and I know this in ourselves. We know this. When we walk in pilgrimage, it is walking into newness of life, but we never walk alone. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. That was absolutely inspiring and rocked us in our seats, I think.